I sat at a table of 18 staring relatives, looking down at a $5,217.46 steakhouse bill. The black leather presenter felt incredibly heavy against the white linen tablecloth. My estranged mother smiled. Her teeth were stained slightly red from the expensive wine. "You're paying this, right?" she said. Her voice wasn't a question. It was a command. The clinking of crystal champagne glasses across the table suddenly stopped. The low, ambient hum of the packed luxury restaurant seemed to entirely evaporate. I didn't panic. I just stared at the embossed gold lettering on the leather cover. I looked across the long table at the man who had orchestrated this. My father. He was laughing softly, holding a half-empty glass of vintage champagne, playing the role of the wealthy benefactor to his siblings. I had already paid $12,500 4 years ago to keep him out of federal prison. He had stolen my Social Security number to open fraudulent commercial equipment loans for his failing catering business. I had wired the money to clear the debt. I kept him out of a jail cell. And then I blocked their numbers. I endured 4 agonizing years of total silence. I spent every waking hour rebuilding my completely destroyed credit score. The isolation was suffocating, but it was safe. Tell me in the comments. What is the most expensive mistake you've ever paid for just to keep peace in your family? 3 weeks ago, my mother left a tearful voicemail on my phone. She claimed my father's health was rapidly failing. She said his heart was giving out. She begged for a small, quiet reconciliation dinner before it was too late. If you've walked into a trap because you desperately wanted to believe a toxic parent had changed, hit subscribe. You need to see exactly how this ambush was built. I didn't panic on the drive over. I just kept the radio off in my car and rehearsed exactly what I would say. I kept the heater blasting, but my hands were entirely freezing. I drove to the restaurant expecting a quiet booth for 3 in a dimly lit corner. Instead, the hostess led me to a massive private dining alcove in the center of the room. 18 extended relatives were already seated. Aunts, uncles, and cousins I hadn't seen in half a decade were passing around silver platters of appetizers. My parents were already seated at the very head of the table. Before I even took my coat off, my father flagged down the sommelier with a flick of his wrist. It was a gesture practiced by men who actually had money, mimicked perfectly by a man who had none. He didn't ask for the wine list. He just loudly demanded 3 more bottles of their vintage champagne. At $500 a bottle. I watched the sommelier pour the pale gold liquid into 18 crystal flutes. I watched my aunts and uncles raise their glasses, toasting to my father's supposed generosity. They were drinking my money, and they didn't even know it. Waiters brought out towering silver platters of king crab legs on crushed ice. They carried out thick, charred cuts of dry-aged filet mignon. The smell of expensive butter and roasted garlic was thick in the air. The sheer gluttony of the table was physically sickening. I sat at the far end of the table. I drank tap water. I kept my hands folded neatly in my lap. I observed the noise, waiting for the apology that I slowly realized was never going to come. My corporate ID badge was clipped to the inner lining of my purse. Senior Financial Compliance Analyst. It is a mundane habit from swiping through secure doors at my office building. I never leave home without it. I should have paid closer attention at the hostess stand. When I first walked through the heavy glass restaurant doors, the hostess had looked at her screen and cheerfully said, "Ah, Cindy, we have the table ready for the host." I had brushed it off as a polite mistake. It wasn't a mistake. The heavy ceramic plates were finally cleared by the busboys. The table grew quiet as dessert menus were declined. The lead server walked past my father. He walked past my mother. He walked the entire length of the table directly toward me. He placed the heavy, black leather bill presenter directly in front of my plate. My mother leaned forward, resting her elbows on the white linen. She slid the leather booklet an inch closer to my hand. "You're paying this, right?" She smiled. Her voice carried loudly over the 18 guests. She wanted an audience. She wanted the social pressure to suffocate me. I opened the cover. $5,217.46. The receipt was printed on thick, thermal paper. I didn't look at the total. I looked at the top margin of the itemized receipt. The reservation was printed under my full legal name. Beneath that, the table deposit was listed as secured. It used a Visa card ending in 4409. I recognized those 4 digits instantly. It wasn't a canceled card. It wasn't an old account. It was my current active corporate expense card. The math clicked into place with violent precision. Last Tuesday, 4 p.m. My mother had visited my apartment under the guise of dropping off a medical update about my father's supposed heart condition. She was in my home for exactly 10 minutes. I had left her alone in the kitchen for 60 seconds to get her a glass of water. 60 seconds. My newly issued corporate expense mail had been sitting unopened on the marble island. I didn't think twice about it. Now, looking at the receipt, the reality was entirely clear. She hadn't come for a medical update. She had come to harvest my financial data. They didn't just invite me to pay for dinner. They had committed federal identity theft to secure the table. This was never a reconciliation. It was a premeditated financial ambush. I placed my palm flat on the leather cover to slide it back across the table. My mother reached out. She physically grabbed my wrist. Her nails dug sharply into my skin, pressing hard right over my pulse point. "Just pay it, Cindy," she whispered venomously. "Don't embarrass the family." I looked down at her hand. I didn't blink. I didn't feel heartbroken. I just felt the familiar, cold precision of my day job kicking in. I physically peeled her fingers off my wrist one by one. I flipped the leather bill presenter closed with a sharp, definitive snap. I locked eyes with the server standing across the dining room. I gave a subtle, authoritative 2-finger nod. I didn't scream. I didn't make a scene. I smiled warmly at my mother. "Of course," I said, keeping my face completely blank. "Let me just get the server to clarify a few of these charges." The server stepped up to my right shoulder. I reached into my purse. I pulled out my heavy, metal corporate ID badge. I leaned in. I whispered exactly 2 sentences. "The card used for this reservation is stolen. Bring me your general manager." The server looked at the fraudulent reservation name printed on the receipt. He looked at my father at the end of the table. He looked back at me and smiled. "Right away, ma'am," he whispered. He took the leather booklet and walked away. My mother smirked, settling back into her upholstered chair. She assumed I was simply sorting out a split payment across my credit cards. She assumed the trap had worked flawlessly. My father stood up at the head of the table. He raised his champagne glass, tapping a silver spoon against the crystal to command the room's attention. "To the family being back together," he announced loudly. He was drunk on his own ego and the absolute thrill of the scam. If you are taking notes on how to legally bankrupt a narcissist before dessert is even served, hit the subscribe button right now. You do not want to miss this next part. I sat perfectly still. I sipped my tap water. Through the glass office windows at the back of the restaurant, I watched the general manager, Mr. Albright. He was dialing the corporate merchant fraud hotline. I maintained absolute, suffocating radio silence for exactly 20 minutes. 20 minutes. I let my father comfortably digest his stolen filet mignon. I listened to an oblivious aunt across the table compliment the expensive vintage of the wine, entirely unaware she was an accessory to fraud. I watched my mother begin checking her diamond watch nervously. Every tick of the second hand was another nail in their coffin. Minute 20 arrived. I watched Mr. Albright walk out of his glass office. He was holding a digital tablet and a thick, stapled system printout. The main dining room was packed and loud, but as he approached our alcove, the ambient noise seemed to completely evaporate. Our corner of 18 people grew deathly quiet. My father looked up from his empty plate. His face was flushed red from the alcohol. He laughed loudly. "Is there a problem with my daughter's card, Albright?" he asked, waving his hand dismissively at the manager. I didn't answer him. I leaned back against the leather upholstery. I crossed my arms. Mr. Albright did not smile. He placed the printout face down on the table, keeping his hand pressed firmly against the paper. "This reservation was secured with a credit card ending in 4409, Mr. Albright announced. His voice carried clearly across the 18 guests. The lady at the end of the table has just provided her corporate ID and federal documentation proving that card was reported stolen in an active identity theft case. Mr. Albright looked directly at my father. You are actively attempting to run a stolen credit card to pay for a $5,000 dinner. The blood drained completely from my mother's face. The muscles in her hand went completely slack. The delicate crystal stem of her champagne glass slipped through her fingers. It tipped over, spilling pale gold liquid across the pristine white linen tablecloth. My father's chest collapsed inward. He stammered. A wet, choking sound caught in his throat. He physically shrank into his chair as the grand illusion of his wealth evaporated in front of his siblings. The 18 extended relatives gasped in unison. I heard the sharp, collective scrape of wooden chair legs against the hardwood floor. My aunts and uncles physically pulled back from the table. They instantly distanced themselves from the fraud laid bare. Mr. Albright placed a mobile card processing terminal directly in front of my father's plate. The deposit is voided. You have 10 minutes to produce a valid method of payment for the balance, or I am instructing my staff to contact the police, Mr. Albright stated. My father pulled his actual, worn leather wallet from his jacket pocket. His hands were shaking violently. He inserted a silver credit card into the terminal. I listened to the crisp, mechanical whir of the mobile card reader processing the chip. The digital screen flashed bright red. Insufficient funds. He tried a second card. Declined. I stood up from my chair. Mr. Albright handed me a separate, folded receipt. I was formally cleared of all liability by corporate management. I walked away from the table. I left them surrounded by half-eaten crab shells, declining credit cards, and the absolute, suffocating silence of their own family. I walked out through the heavy glass doors and into the cool, sharp night air. I unlocked my car. I opened my leatherwork briefcase, sitting on the passenger seat. I neatly filed the $0 cleared receipt into a manila folder. The financial trap was dismantled flawlessly. The logic held perfectly, but a hollow realization settled in my chest as I turned the ignition key. My parents will never view me as anything more than a vulnerable asset to be liquidated. The night I stopped paying for them became a permanent, lifetime sentence of estrangement. If your family views your success as their safety net, how long until they decide your life is just their collateral? Let me know in the comments. If you were sitting at that table, would you have paid the bill to avoid the scene, or would you have let the police arrive? Like this video to seal your own boundaries.
Subscribe.
We don't just survive toxic environments, we quarantine them. Next week, I explain exactly how to reverse engineer a narcissist's financial smear campaign using a single certified letter. They set a massive financial trap. They forgot I was the auditor. Silence. Hard cut.